The latest edition of Wine2Wine takes place in Verona on the 25th and 26th of November 2019. I am super honored to have been invited to appear on a panel discussing podcasts, audience growth, education, and social sustainability, which I hope to broadcast here at a later date. As part of my preparation for that talk, I put together a special deck that sets out all of the podcast equipment that I use to produce Interpreting Wine. To see that, and I hope get you started on your podcasting journey, just head to interpretingwine.com/kit. This series was recorded at this year's Wine2Wine in Verona and will feature interviews with the key organizers, as well as selected speakers, bringing the experience of this major digital event and allowing you to feel a part of proceedings no matter where in the world you are. Today's episode of the Wine2Wine series features Polly Hammond, founder and managing director at 5forests, a New Zealand-based branding expert working with wineries all over the world. We hear Polly's origin story. She discusses the 5forests client journey. We talk her involvement in Wine2Wine. And we look ahead to her presentation on millennials and wine. Enjoy.
The wine origin story, I actually never meant to work in wine, and it was in fact a very intentional decision made some years ago because my father-in-law was a executive in the wine industry in California, or in the spirits industry in California, and we were given the option of did we want to do that or go our own path. And we said no, we wanted a normal life with normal hours and normal health and normal all the other things that maybe weren't such a big part of spirits industry back then. We expatriated from Los Angeles and moved to New Zealand, where summarily we made friends with dozens of New Zealand winemakers. And I ended up adapting over time quite by accident my education, which was in conflict mediation and negotiation. And then I had a love affair with an area that became known as behavioral economics. And vocationally, I was a designer. I'd not been allowed to get a design degree because my family thought that I would never make a dime with it. So slowly over time, I ended up advising businesses about how they could use design and adapt to the digital environment using the best practices from behavioral economics to influence spending. That trickled over into our dinner time conversations with all of our winemaking friends until the day came that I realized that I was doing it a lot more for wine than I was for non-wine, and it just made sense to officially transition over. And suddenly we went from not working in wine to, great, we're back. We're working in wine. Yeah. For years, I was working as a designer, and I'd been forced into a situation where I also had to learn how to build a business because we're in New Zealand and we had no safety net. There was absolutely nothing to fall back on. So we had to use all of the information we had to build an effective business, to understand strategy, to understand how what surprisingly had been an education in something completely unrelated was incredibly effective for gaining confidence and customers. And again, this was 25 years ago. So then at some point, for instance, I ended up working with artisanal producers. So they were people who all over the world were learning to adapt to digital. So the lawyer who had quit his job to make guitars in his garage, or artisanal honey producers, or potters, people who really, they had a passion for something they wanted to accomplish, but they had none of the business acumen, nor the design background, nor the digital background to make it happen. And that was the space where I spent many, many years. And those were the kind of people who were helping me learn that, holy shit, what I was doing, which came as a real shock to me, was I was actually teaching and consulting with these individuals to help them learn how to take something that they loved in a romantic, value belief system and turn it into an effective business model. Yeah. And again, it was a lot of dinner time conversations. At the time this was happening, wine was hearing a lot about direct to consumer, but they had no idea what that meant. I started talking to my friends about, okay, well, what is your strategy? What are your goals? How are you communicating with people? People would say to me, ask questions about how to use social media. And I'm looking at them saying, well, what do you want to accomplish with social media? And it just was not a part of wine business. People were looking at it as sort of a fun adjunct, but not as an effective form of business building. And that was really the start of it many, many years ago. And I was lucky enough when I decided that I was going to professionally transition into wine. I studied with Tim Hanai, who's an MW, and he is incredibly pragmatic about, Tim, I hope it's okay that I say that, about what we need to know and how we need to not be judging things that are commonly judged in wine. So, disparity between fine wine market versus industrial wine production. And it's very easy to pick a side instead of saying, there's a lot that the industry as a whole can learn from what's going on outside of our industry. And that's the position that we come from. And I actually feel like it's a real benefit to my clients that I don't come from wine and that my team doesn't come from wine, because I'm not interested in what has always happened in wine. I'm interested in what we need to be doing to be effective businesses 5 and 10 years from now.
In a lot of ways, you're preaching to the converted. I mean, we were kind of talking before we turned on the mic that, I'm 2 years really into the wine industry, and I have been outside of it and doing other things for all that time beforehand. And I like to think that I bring a fresh perspective, and certainly I think through podcasting and through what I'm doing here, I like to think that I'm doing things slightly differently. And I think wine can evolve, and I think there's opportunity. I don't like to see it as they're doing something wrong, inverted commas. I think, look, you guys are doing great. Wine is a massive industry. It's feeding a lot of mouths. It's giving a lot of pleasure to people, but I think they could be reaching more people, feeding more mouths, keeping more people kind of on the land, and maybe doing more good. And based on that, I'm really then curious to kind of almost have you kind of tell the story of kind of an intervention, I guess you'd say, like where you've worked with a producer, where you can kind of do a kind of a before, during, and after. Talking us through kind of what was the initial engagement? Why did they come to you? What was the sort of driver for that? What were the things that you found out and you kind of flushed out, and what were the kind of the things that then came out of that and I would imagine led them into a different kind of space?
Okay, so it's probably easier for me to talk about the archetypal wine producer who ends up in my office with me, or me in their office with them. Generally, what we have are producers who've heard a lot. You need to be looking at digital. You need to be moving into social media. You need to be blogging or podcasting or YouTubing or this or sponsoring or that. And they're actually bombarded by a lot of information that, frankly, they don't understand, because my clients specifically, I work with small to medium-sized businesses. I do not work with large corporations, and that's a choice. And so they are unclear about how to grow, but they understand that they must. So they generally have been referred to me by someone else, and they come in the door just saying, we don't know what we're supposed to be doing or where we're going with this. And initially, the problem that we see and that we try to resolve is that a lot of them don't even have very clear goals, because we do go into wine with, in many cases, these romanticized ideals of what it's going to be like creating this product that we love and adore. But we haven't laid out a financial strategy. We don't understand what our long-term goals are. We're often not honest about our goals, because when you are a producer who you've gone in maybe for vanity reasons or romantic reasons, you might feel discomfort for saying that, well, really, I just need to make money, right? So what normally happens is they get to me and we go through about 3 days together where it is me or my team and their stakeholders. And we actually get down into the dirt of what are we doing? It's very intense. I've only ever made one person cry, and she was a friend, so it was okay. But, why am I there in the room? What are they trying to accomplish? I work on a system of goals, capabilities, and constraints. So what are the things that are holding them back? What are the things that they love to do? What are the ways that we can move forward? And that's really important because a lot of agencies will go in and they will lay out these strategies that are just not tenable for an average small producer. So we do 3 days where we work through them understanding how to produce a strategy, how to identify their goals, how to make certain that they're capturing measurable metrics, not vanity metrics, but like genuinely the information they need to have in order to iterate and grow their business. We'll do customer personas. We can do timelining. It's very organic, working with their team and their strengths and weaknesses. And then by the end of those 3 days, hopefully we have what I describe as a flexible action plan. So something that when I walk out of that room, if they want to go out all on their own and do it, they are empowered to understand better business choices for their winery, to know what they need to be tracking, how far in advance they need to be planning, where they're going to get their data from, who their people are, clear messaging. I mean, the number of wineries that you go in, and the way that I do it, and I'm happy to share this with you, is really very, what do you do? Just to ask a winemaker, what do you do? And to get an answer that strikes at the heart of what they do, not that superficial answer, but really what they're doing and why they do it. That can take hours on end. And getting to the exact right word so that across the board, if they're looking to scale, if they need to be able to share a message across multiple channels, that they can do that consistently and engender loyalty and confidence because they actually know what their brand stands for. And to filter out the bullshit. I mean, think about the number of requests that wineries get for events, for money, for advertising, for support. And the number of wineries I see that will just throw money at that without knowing what questions to ask to find out if it is a good match and it has a potential for a return on investment. Even being empowered to ask those questions. So that was a very roundabout answer. So where that can go is sometimes they have in-house teams who just needed a bit of clarity. They get to that. We have a document. We have a strategy laid out, and great, they're on their way. Sometimes we have had it happen where they look at it and they say, holy shit, that was not what I expected, and maybe we should sell. And I mean, because that's always an option. And then we also have the ones that go on to have enormous successes with the work that they do. They revamp it. I've got one winery that I'm working right now that I'm so excited about because I had not expected it when we first got into the work with them, that they have launched or are about to launch a massive groundbreaking direct-to-consumer program in their market that just, it hasn't been done before. And it took a lot of willingness to risk and belief that this was the way of the future, to put that line in the sand and understand how it's going to change their margins and help them accomplish their end goals. I'm super conscious when I do these discoveries that they are a specific offering, and I don't want anybody to ever think that they're a pitch for any other work. But I'm not going to lie when I say that, yeah, absolutely, there are times that we get in the room with the client, and because we've done the discovery and we know the brand so well, I mean, we're a full digital marketing agency. So yes, we do in some of those cases get the ongoing work from them. And we do great work for them because we already know what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve. We've gone through the strategy with them. We've laid out the core values, the brand attributes. We've researched the markets in many cases for them. So yes, there is a path that can go on from there. But I just try to be so aware when I'm in the room with them that that's not ever the goal in that moment.
Really sounds very fascinating, and I like the way that you've answered that, because you have given the archetype, and I think that gives as much really as we can talk about today of that process, because I'd imagine it's a very experiential process. It's unique. It's kind of tailored to each person. But what I want to do now is kind of move us right bang up to where we're sitting right now here in the hotel in Verona. On the eve of your presentation that you're going to be giving tomorrow at 12 o'clock. I want to keep this question really, really short, but I want to get you to kind of introduce that session. But I'm also just curious to unpick a little bit of how that title, how that session kind of came about, and just unpick a little bit of your interaction with Wine2Wine, really, and getting to this place. Before I hope you then, share something around what you're hoping to achieve in giving that talk tomorrow.
Okay, so I guess we'll talk about my experience with Wine2Wine. I live in New Zealand. It's very far away. One of the things I so firmly believe is that our industry must be exposed to more voices, more experiences, and that it's not healthy for me to sit in New Zealand and read New Zealand wine data. We have to get beyond. So for several years now, I've spent a lot of time on planes going to as many wine thinking conferences as I possibly can. I was at this one last year and completely loved it. So when this year Stevie invited me to speak, I was very nervous, but also completely over the moon. So that's how that came about. And initially, the request was, would I come and talk about behavioral economics and wine? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. It's going to be a snooze fest, and I'm going to lose the audience. How about if instead you let me talk about something that's very, very dear to me, which is I feel like I'm the only person in the room ever who friggin' loves millennials. I love millennials. I love what they are bringing to our culture, to our economy, to our way of thinking. And I got the thumbs up on that. And so that's how tomorrow's presentation came about. And yes, so the speech title is Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, Why Millennials May Be the Best Thing That's Happened to Wine. And this is both personal and data driven. So my team are millennials, and my business partner is a millennial, and I am offended every time I see this ongoing rhetoric of them being entitled snowflakes, because that's just crap. In every generation, you've got your entitled people, but the millennials I know are hard workers. They're dedicated. They're some of the most educated people I've ever worked with. They read all the time. They research. And I think that as an industry, and you'll see this in the slide deck tomorrow, sure, we can sit back and we can continue to bitch about something that is hard for us, or we can look at it and say, all right, what do we need to be learning? This is the way of the future. Let's open our eyes and open our ears and stop with this bullshit about millennials are killing wine. Because, so my business partner, Michael, who'll be glad that he's getting shout out on this, he will honestly say to you when he hears this, it's not that millennials aren't buying wine, it's that they're just not buying your wine. That's the problem we have to solve. And that's what we're tackling tomorrow. Okay, and also the title. I love pop culture. I love Star Wars and The Matrix and Lord of the Rings. And honestly, we laugh and say that my magic power, my superpower, is that I can relate any marketing story in the world to Star Wars analogy. And so it definitely was just a Daft Punk ripoff. Was that I was thinking about how did I want to talk about how we need to work for millennials, and I was like, holy shit, that's it. We have to work harder, better, faster, stronger if we want to get to this audience, and if we want to actually learn what we need to learn in order to grow in perpetuity, not just to tap into this one audience, which is the argument that's going to happen tomorrow.
Your presentation is kind of embargoed until 12 o'clock tomorrow. However, on the trust system, this podcast will not air before 12 o'clock tomorrow. I can assure you that. So I feel able to ask you, give us, what might be something of a preview, some takeaway that maybe somebody who's not in the room tomorrow, who's listening to this, is in another country, is somewhere, what are maybe one or two of the takeaways, examples, give them a little piece of that presentation tomorrow that they can potentially impact in their part of the world.
I think that it's best summed up with a quote from Google, which is that the age of demographics is dead, and now we're living in the age of intent. The notion that millennials are a homogenous cohort that's based on age bracketing is ridiculous. It's a mindset. And that mindset has been adopted by, tech-loving grannies all the way down to certainly elements of Gen Z, which it represents a huge problem because we're not even talking about that, and they've all just hit drinking age. And so what we're talking about tomorrow is not actually how millennials as a group of kids born between 1 year and the next year are impacting wine, but rather how consumer expectations are forcing us to engage in critical thinking exercises that have been so far only the purview of large corporate industrial wines. So things like customer personas, customer experience, really laying out, what your service looks like, how we communicate with them. And in doing that, understanding that these changes that we're making are to the greater benefit for the whole of our industry, even if, let's say, you're going to stand there and argue with me that you have no millennial consumers, I guarantee that knowing who your consumers are, who they trust, how they get their information, understanding their journey with your brand, recognizing, the role of technology, what is appropriate technology, understanding consistent messaging and communication across multiple channels. These are going to be a benefit of any winery. And that is the theme tomorrow, is saying, what can we learn from what they have forced businesses around industries and around the globe to alter, and use that to our ongoing benefit. Just I like it. Yeah. Don't tell Joe that, because he's talking right before me.
Thank you so much, Polly. I genuinely feel that your ideas shared here will be food for thought for many of the listeners. And I'd encourage you to check out 5forests website and main social media handles below. If you're new to the Interpreting Wine podcast, welcome, and I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. Next time on the Interpreting Wine podcast, I'll be in conversation with another of the speakers from the Wine2Wine conference. See you then.